They knelt him down in the yard of the Red Keep, the old man who had ruled the 7 kingdoms in all but name, who had served 3 kings and crowned the last of them, and they took his head. He was the very first traitor the new queen ordered slain, the first of her enemies to die. And as the block was readied, a bitter truth must have risen in him. For years before, in a darkened council chamber, he had warned them all that this exact end would come, if ever Rhaenyra triumphed. He had seen his own death plainly, named it aloud, and labored his whole life to prevent it. And now, kneeling in the dust, he watched the prophecy he himself had spoken come true to the letter. Born a younger son with no lands of his own, dead by 130 AC at the order of the Queen, he had spent his life trying to keep from the throne. This is the complete story of Sir Otto Hightower. But was Otto a hero who served his king and house with unbending loyalty? A monster who lit the slow fuse of a war that consumed a dynasty, or simply the coldest schemer the Iron Throne had ever known? Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries, heroes and monsters of Westeros. This is Otto Hightower, hand to kings, loyal to none. He was born into one of the oldest and proudest houses in all of Westeros. The Hightowers ruled Oldtown, that ancient city of scholars and septs, and their great beacon tower had blazed above the city since the dawn of memory. But Otto was not born to inherit any of it. He was a younger brother of the reigning Lord Hightower, a second son, and a second son receives a fine name and little else. He would have no tower, no city, no lands to call his own. What he had instead was a mind. The histories describe him as a man of great learning, but also as proud, haughty, blunt, and domineering, cautious and methodical and endlessly ambitious. He was resented and envied by many, and he gave them little reason to love him. He was no warrior. His weapon was never the sword but the pen, the sealed letter, the quiet alliance. And in time, that gift would carry this landless second son higher than the lord his brother ever climbed. It would also, in the end, destroy him. For Sir Otto Hightower came to court, and he brought his wife and his children with him, and he entered the service of the greatest king the realm had ever known. That king was Jaehaerys the First, called the Old King, who had worn the crown longer than any Targaryen before or since. By the year 101 AC, the Old King was failing, his strength and his wits beginning to fade. And in that same year, his hand, who was also his heir, Prince Baelon the Brave, died suddenly of a burst belly in the Tower of the Hand. The king needed a new hand, and his eye fell upon the learned, tireless Hightower second son. Otto was raised to the office, and he would serve as hand of the king for all the remainder of Jaehaerys' life. Here, at the very summit of the realm, the landless younger brother had arrived. When the old king at last died in 103 AC, the throne passed to his grandson, Viserys the First, and Otto Hightower did not fall with the old reign. He held his place. The new king kept him on as hand, the seamless serving of one king to the next, the first proof of how indispensable Otto had made himself. His chance came with a death. In 105 AC, Queen Aemma of House Arryn, the king's first wife, died in the birthing bed, and the son she labored to bring into the world lived but a single day. King Viserys was left a widower. He would need a new queen, and Otto Hightower had a daughter. Her name was Alicent, clever and charming and graceful, and within a year the king took her to wife. With that single marriage, the landless second son planted his own blood directly beside the Iron Throne. He was now the king's good father. The children Alicent would bear, a son named Aegon, a daughter named Helaena, and the princes Aemond and Daeron would be the king's own. Otto Hightower's grandchildren would carry the blood of the dragon. No alliance he could ever have schemed for matched what this one marriage gave him. But here the histories begin to whisper. For there were rumors, ugly ones, that Alicent had shared the king's bed while Queen Aemma still lived, that the marriage had been seduced into being rather than honorably won. The fool called Mushroom, whose testimony is as salacious as it is unreliable, went further still and claimed that Alicent had been more than a nurse to the old King Jaehaerys himself in his final dotage. The pious chroniclers dismiss all of this as slander, and so the realm was left with a question it could never answer. Was Otto a loyal servant whose daughter honestly won a grieving king's heart? Or was he a calculating schemer who placed his own girl in a dying line of kings to seize the crown for his blood? The histories cannot agree, and they leave the innuendo hanging in the dark. Whatever the truth, the marriage made Otto the most powerful man in the realm save the king himself, and he set about making that power permanent. For now there was a crack in the succession, and Otto would spend the next 2 decades widening it. Years before, in his grief, King Viserys had named his daughter from his first marriage, the Princess Rhaenyra, his heir, and made the great lords kneel and swear their oaths to uphold her claim. But once Alicent began giving the king sons, everything changed. Otto began to press the king, gently at first and then relentlessly, to set Rhaenyra aside and name young Aegon his heir instead, as the ancient custom of the realm set sons before daughters. This was the origin of the Great Schism. On one side gathered the party of the queen and her father, championing Aegon. On the other stood the princess and those loyal to her oath. The realm would come to call them the Greens and the Blacks. And Otto Hightower stood at the very root of the Green cause. Over the long years that followed, with patient and methodical care, Otto stacked the king's small council with his own supporters. He built a faction the way a meister builds a chain, link by careful link, until the court itself was bent toward his daughter's line. But he overplayed his hand. For King Viserys hated discord above all things, and he would not be moved. To the end, he refused to set Rhaenyra aside, and he grew sick to death of his hand's endless hectoring on the matter. At last, the weary king dismissed Otto Hightower from his office, stripped him of the chain, and sent him home to Oldtown. In his place, Viserys named Lord Lionel Strong of Harrenhal, a quieter man who did not nag him about his daughter. The great schemer had pushed too hard, and he had fallen. So Otto returned to Oldtown, out of office but not out of power. He remained the patriarch of the Green Party even in exile, and his daughter the Queen and her growing children kept his cause alive at the heart of the court while he waited. And Otto Hightower was very good at waiting. His patience was rewarded by another fire. In 120 AC, Lord Lionel Strong and his son, the famed knight Ser Harwin Breakbones, died together in a sudden and mysterious blaze at Harrenhal, that cursed and haunted castle. The office of Hand fell empty once more, and King Viserys, preferring the familiar to the unknown, recalled Otto Hightower from Oldtown and restored to him the chain he had lost. The schemer had returned. He would serve as Hand for all the rest of Viserys's reign, and by now he had prepared, with a patience few men possess, for the day his king would die. That day came in 129 AC. King Viserys the First passed quietly in his sleep. To the very end, in law and in oath, he had named Rhaenyra his heir, but the realm would not learn of it until Otto Hightower had moved. This was the hour he had built his whole life toward, and he seized it with terrible certainty. the king's death was sealed away from the city, and in a chamber of the Red Keep, Otto convened the Green Council to crown his grandson before the rightful heir could lift a hand. There gathered the Dowager Queen Alicent, his daughter, Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, the lords of their faction, the masters of coin and ships and laws, the master of whisperers, Larys the Clubfoot, and Grand Maester Orwyle. And over them all presided Otto Hightower, Hand of the King. He took command of that room utterly. When some would have spoken of crowning Rhaenyra, he cut off all discussion and declared that the council must first decide the succession. He announced that, as Hand of the King, he himself would rule the 7 kingdoms until Aegon was crowned. And he laid out the iron logic of the Green Cause, that Rhaenyra could never be permitted the throne, because behind her stood her husband, Prince Daemon, who would be the true power in the land. If they won, Otto warned, Daemon would immediately put both Queen Alicent and Otto himself to death. Mark those words well, for the histories never forget them. He spoke his own ending aloud in that room years before it came. And the first blood of the Long War was spilled at that very table, though the histories cannot agree on how. The old master of coin, Lord Lyman Beesbury, alone among them stood for Rhaenyra, and named the gathering treason. Grand Maester Orwyle, who was present in the chamber, wrote that Otto ordered the old lord seized and cast into the black cells, where he later died of a chill. But Septon Eustace, who was not there, tells a darker tale that Sir Criston Cole slit the old man's throat at the council table. And Mushroom, who was not there either, claims that Cole flung Beesbury from a window onto the spikes below. The chronicler Gildane notes that neither Eustace nor Mushroom witnessed it, and that Orwyle's account was written from a prison cell to save his own neck. So even now, the first death of the Dance of the Dragons remains uncertain, and Otto Hightower's exact part in it is a thing the histories whisper but cannot prove. Whatever the truth of that chamber, the work was done. While Alicent set Criston Cole and Prince Aemond to find the reluctant Aegon, who did not want the crown, Otto turned to the task he was made for. He sent his letters and his envoys to gather the great houses of the realm, to win their allegiance for Aegon the Second before Rhaenyra could answer. He ran the political machinery of the usurpation with a master's hand. Aegon was crowned, and Otto Hightower continued as his hand, the 3rd king he had served. But he had built a war he did not fully control, and it began to slip from his careful grasp at once. He was, always and ever, the diplomat. When Rhaenyra crowned herself on Dragonstone, it was Otto's wing of the council that urged parley over war, and Grand Maester Orwyle was sent under a peace banner with generous terms. Rhaenyra refused them, and when Otto dispatched his own grandson, Prince Aemond, to Storm's End on the great dragon Vhagar, it was to win Lord Boros Baratheon with the offer of a marriage, not to make war. But there at Storm's End, the boy Lucerys Velaryon arrived as Rhaenyra's envoy, and in the storm above Shipbreaker Bay, Aemond and his dragon killed the boy and his mount both. When Aemond returned, Otto saw at once what his grandson had done. He had murdered any hope of a negotiated peace, and the old hand rebuked him with words the histories preserve. "You only lost one eye," he said. "How could you be so blind?" For Otto understood what the young and the proud did not. This was a war he had wanted to win with letters and alliances and marriages, and the kinslaying over the bay had set the realm on a road that ended only in fire, and the fire did not favor the Greens. Daemon took Harrenhal. House after house declared for the Blacks. And through it all, Otto labored at the only weapon he truly trusted. He reached across the narrow sea to the Triarchy, the three daughters of Myr and Lys and Tyrosh, old enemies of Daemon, and he offered them a bargain. Smash the Valyrian blockade of the Gullet, he promised them, and they would have exclusive trading rights at King's Landing and the Stepstones for their own. It was patient, brilliant work, the work of a lifetime's craft. But it took time, and time was the one thing his grandson the king would not give him. For King Aegon the Second had no patience for his grandfather's prevarications. He wanted swords drawn and dragons in the sky, not sealed letters carried by slow ships. And so, the pious Septon Eustace tells us, the king came upon the old man writing yet another of his endless letters, and in a fury knocked the inkpot into Otto's lap and snarled at him to spill blood, not ink. We should remember that this vivid scene comes to us through Eustace alone, a man who loved to make Aegon look bold, and so we cannot know if the inkpot is true history or a storyteller's flourish. But the deed that followed is certain. Despite the pleading of Queen Alicent, his own daughter, King Aegon the Second tore the chain of office from his grandfather's neck and gave the hand of the king to Sir Criston Cole to take the fight to the Blacks at last. For the third and final time, Otto Hightower had fallen, and this fall would be his last. And here, the histories turn the knife, for the irony is almost too cruel to bear. It was only after Otto was dismissed, only after his chain was torn away, that his great scheme bore its fruit. The High Council of the Triarchy accepted his alliance and sent 90 warships to the Gullet. On the 5th day of 130 AC, that fleet fell upon the Valyrians in the bloody battle that men would call the Battle of the Gullet, a true strategic blow against the Blacks. The Diplomat had won his war by letter after all, but the man who had engineered it was no longer hand to claim the victory, dismissed for the very caution that had just succeeded. He would not live to be vindicated, for the tide of the whole war turned, and it turned against the Greens entirely. Rhaenyra and Daemon brought their dragons over King's Landing itself. The gold cloaks of the city, who had never forgotten that Daemon was once their beloved commander, threw open the gates. The captains chosen for their loyalty to Aegon were imprisoned or slain. King Aegon the Second was smuggled out of the city in secret with his children, leaving his counselors behind to face the conqueror. The Greens who remained yielded, and Rhaenyra Targaryen climbed at last onto the Iron Throne, and then she began to take heads. The very first traitor she ordered executed, the first of her enemies to die for opposing her crown, was Sir Otto Hightower. They brought the old man to the block, the schemer who had served 3 kings and crowned the last of them, and they struck off his head. Hard upon him went Lord Jasper Wild, called Ironrod, beheaded second, immediately after. The architect of the Green Cause was the first head the new queen claimed, and so his own prophecy came true, almost to the letter. He had warned that a triumphant Rhaenyra would immediately put both Alicent and Otto to death, and Otto died exactly as he had foreseen. Yet the histories note one strange mercy in it. The one he had feared for most, his daughter Alicent, was spared. She was imprisoned, not killed. The dark vision he had spoken aloud in that council chamber struck him down and passed her by. He had predicted his own end and missed his daughter's survival. The one consolation the cold schemer never lived to learn of. He left no dragon and no legend of fire behind him. He was never a dragon rider, never a Targaryen, only a Hightower of Oldtown with a sharp mind and a sealed letter. The dragons in his story all belonged to others. to the grandchildren he raised up, and the enemies he could not out-scheme. His only weapons had ever been his patience and his pen, and in a war of dragons, the pen was not enough to save him. So was he a hero, a monster, or a schemer? The histories cannot quite decide, and perhaps that is the truest answer of all. He was loyal, fiercely loyal, to his house and his blood, and the grandson he placed upon the throne. And for that loyalty, he gave his whole life, and at the last, his head. He was also the cold architect of the deadliest war the Seven Kingdoms ever knew. The man who widened a crack in the succession into a chasm and crowned a king against a dead king's dying wish. He was a diplomat in a war that wanted butchers, dismissed for the very caution that won his greatest victory. And he was a prophet of his own doom, who saw the block in his future and walked toward it anyway, because he could see no other road for his blood. The pious Septon Eustace makes his fears look prudent. The body mushroom makes him a procurer and a fraud. The official telling of Munkun, drawn from a prisoner's confession, pins the first blood of the war upon his hand. And Gildane, stitching their quarrels together, leaves us a man we can never fully see, remembered only through the biased pens of others. A landless second son who rose to rule the realm 3 times over, and was undone, at the very last, by the king he made. From first breath to last, that was Otto Hightower.